Next. I end up getting scanned in this old comic, this yellow version of 60s book, whatever, torn covers. Next. End up putting the image on this cover, and I thought, but it still doesn't feel like it's old. So then, next, I took some actual water damage that was from a magazine, scanned that in, inversed it, next, laid it on top of the book, so when the finished product was done, hopefully it gave the illusion that it was an old beat-up comic. And that was the illusion. Now guys, I want you to know, I've taken you down in the valley. We're now going to start ascending to the mountain. The peak is over here, though.
Thank you, Keith.
Thank you.
So now we have Neil Swaab. Let me open this up first. I can do it. You don't mind showing up. All right. So this is a comic character that I do every week. This is the Mr. Wiggles character, and this is the cover for my last book. So I'll just take you through some of the work pretty quickly. So they're basically kind of just weekly comics, and the characters usually just talk to each other and kind of say dirty things. And so he's talking about, he had terrible sex with a woman who just laid there, or he took home a woman who just laid there, and it turns out he took her home from the morgue. So they're just kind of like dirty little things. This one, I won't read all of them, but they usually just end up with all the characters talking, and sometimes I do little different ones every week. This is about the new economy and sort of how the only way that we can get by is to kind of do everything cheaper ourselves. So instead of using child labor, we're going to use baby labor because that's cheaper. All the books are going to have pornography in them because that's what people like. So instead of like Harry Potter, it's Harry Potter and the Chamber of Dawns. It's the giving a BJ tree and eat, pray, anal sex. And then there's another guy who's giving himself his own appendectomy. So, we'll start doing medical procedures. So they're just kind of comics like that. This is one about things that'll happen in the future. Good news, bad news. So like the second one, in the bad news, the human race will be enslaved by aliens. The good news is we'll have alien porn. So just little things like that I'll do every week. It's kind of fun, dirty comics. This is just the studio where I work in. I work with 3 other illustrators in my studio in a big building in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, called the Pencil Factory, which is an old abandoned, well, it's not abandoned, but it's an old pencil factory that's been converted to studio space. So what you see there, those boxes in the front are all copies of my books. I self-published my last one in America. And, I do a lot of art and design and different things, too, besides comics, so this is kind of a good home base for me to work. These are the tools that I use. They're nothing, fancy or special. I don't really believe that you need to have any special tools for comic strips, because comic strips, I think, you don't even need to be a terribly good artist. It's all about, your expression and the idea and the creativity behind it. So, for me, I really want a lo-fi approach, and I don't want to have to feel like I'm creating art. I want to feel like I'm just creating something that's quick and fast and is just about the expression, and I don't want to have to get tied up into all these little things, which it's a lot different than when I do illustration work, which I really will use brushes and fine paper and all these things, but the comics are just quick and dirty that I like to do. This is just an example of my idea sheet. So I keep ideas. I've done a weekly comic for almost 12 years now, and I always need ideas. And so what I'll do is I'll just jot down throughout the day or throughout the week any idea that comes to mind that I think is funny. And then I just sort of keep an archive. So I think this is probably about 14 or 15 pages. And then when I have something that I really like, I'll develop it into a full script. Usually it's not as fancy as this, it's just a Word document, but this was for a series that I did about 15 where my character dies and ends up becoming God. He takes over for God and ends up bringing upon the apocalypse on humanity. And so I will fully script it out. And what you see in the corner, I'll do little tiny thumbnails, just so that I can sort of see how each panel breaks down and if there's enough room for type and all that other stuff. And that's just sort of a bigger example of what the thumbnail looks like. And then from there, I'll actually, that's so just to go back and see how that translates into that. I do all the lettering by hand, but sometimes I'll do it on the computer. I have a font that I made of my handwriting, so I'll do that every once in a while on the computer. And then I'll add color in Photoshop. These are also just to give another idea, because I have a full pencil, because I didn't have pencils for you guys to see, but this is for a poster that I did for a gallery show that I was having. And so first thing, I'll always sketch out ideas, different things, and I talked it over with a gallery director, and we both liked the middle one on the right, so we took that and developed that a little bit further, and that's sort of what a pencil would look like. I do very tight pencils. This actually, I think, is an earlier scan, but my pencils are actually even tighter than that. I just don't want to have any questions when I'm inking. I just sort of like to think more about the quality of the line and not trying to figure out stuff on the page. And that's what my inks look like, using a brush. This piece is fairly large too. Then I color everything in Photoshop, and I put different layers on for each thing, so that if I want to adjust colors, it's very easy to do. And that's sort of what the final piece looks like for that one. And that's really the end of that. So that's my working process. It's it's not very complicated. I don't want to be complicated with my stuff. I just want to be quick and fast and move on to the next idea. So, thanks.
So I see a lot of similarities between the way that I work and Neil and Keith work, but so there's a few differences. So I guess I'll show you what I do. I'm not quite sure where to start. I probably brought too much, so I'll try to go A. So I do a lot of freelance illustration, and I work in animation. I really want to do comics as much as I can, and so that's what I'm going to focus on here. I specialize in parody, and all of my work, even my commercial work, is very parodic. I have a piece in the new GQ, which is a 4-page parody of newspaper comics starring characters from the current midterm elections. So you can imagine the hilarity that ensues. I didn't write that one, but it was a good script, and I was happy to do it. And it's a good day job. It's a great day job. But I just want to show you a few pages from my collection of my own work, which is called Masterpiece Comics. I say this is my own work, but it actually is all parodies of other people's comic book styles in the service of telling classic stories from literature, plays and novels, and epic poetry. So I'm just going to show you a few examples of this. This is my version of Caboose the Stranger. If you've read the book, you'll note that the situations are very accurate, even if the rendering may be a little different than you'd expect. This is my version of Genesis with Adam and Eve, and Daisy the dog is the snake, if you call your Blondie scriptures. This is my version of Crime and Punishment with, well, I don't have to tell you who's in that. This is my version of Dr. Faustus. I realized that the relationship between the devil and Faustus was very similar to the relationship between Garfield and John, so that seemed like a natural. This is my version of The Scarlet Letter. Now, I'm just showing you a couple of pages from these. Some of these stories are very elaborate, and there's a lot of research that goes into making them happen. I'm going to show you a little bit of my process. Just one more sample, though. First, this is Samuel Beckett and Mike Judge together again. So I thought I would just take you through a quick tour of how I put one of these together. This is my version of Wuthering Heights, and I was really struck by how the story of Wuthering Heights is told by the housekeeper, and the old Tales from the Crypt comics are told by the crypt keeper. And that may seem like a really tenuous, stupid connection, and yet it was enough to make me spend a lot of months putting this story together. So I've retold the entirety of Wuthering Heights in a 14-page comic strip. So I'm going to show you a little bit of how I put these things together. I do start with the book. This is my ratty copy of Wuthering Heights that I've had for 20 years. It didn't take me that long to do this strip, but it felt like it. And then I also look for other versions of the book. This is an illustrated edition with illustrations by Fritz Eichenberg, who does wonderful illustrations. And for my purposes, it was quite good because I could sort of see how he treated the costumes and the props and all those sorts of things. I look at the movies. I look at everything. I even look at the Cliff's Notes. Because I'm adapting these stories and really boiling them down, I love to sort of see how other people take the same story and boil it down to smaller segments. So even though I always tell people you must read the novels, don't just read the Cliff's Notes, I do find them invaluable for what I do. These kinds of stories also give me a great opportunity to go out and buy old comics. So these are some of the old Tales from the Crypt comics that I've gathered. And I was really trying to evoke this specific 50s style. This, of course, Tales from the Crypt went on to be a TV series, but before it was that, it was a series of really, really horrible, brilliant. When I say horrible, I mean gruesome. Really gruesome, wonderful comic books. Most of these are drawn by Jack Davis, who was the premier artist of the day, and I tried to evoke his style. As you'll see later, these are the original ones. You can compare these to the ones that I did. I also look at the old classics illustrated. A lot of what I'm making fun of with these parodies that I do is I'm sort of taking the whole idea of adaptation and faithfulness into this kind of extreme, absurd level, where I'm being faithful to my source material, but my source material, such as with Superman and Camus' The Stranger, don't necessarily fit together, and yet I'm still trying to be faithful to the sources. So here's a few early sketches. These are like 3-inch tall doodles that I just do in a sketchbook. I'm just kind of working things out, trying to figure out how much of the story I can fit, trying to make sure I get all the highlights of the story into the version that I'm telling. Even down to the way I'm arranged the panels, I'm really trying to evoke the style of these old comic books, which some people might find really constricting, but I actually find that not having to make all of these choices for yourself, but actually working off of a template that someone else has already created is actually, in a way, very liberating, because you don't have to make the choices. You can kind of embrace the style and learn from it and try and make it work for what you're trying to do. So even for my students, I'm always telling them, look at other artists. I don't think everything needs to come out of your own head. No one has to copy as slavishly as I do, unless they're as masochistic as I am. But for those of you or those of any artists that are starting out and trying to figure out what to do, I think you can get a lot of inspiration from other people. So here's a few more pages of my sketchbook pages. I actually found the text of the novel online. Of course, a lot of what I work with is public domain material, so it's very easy to track down the text. And because I was doing a relatively long story with relatively big captions, it was actually useful for me to edit from the actual text. So I guess I'm defacing Emily Bronte, as so many people are doing with Jane Austen these days. Anyway, so here's my first layout on the computer. I often like to use computer fonts because I'm not so masochistic that I feel a need to letter in the style of everyone I'm parodying. So I was able to find a font that was pretty close to what I wanted. I tweaked it to exactly the style of the old comic books that I was looking at, and I started doing the layouts. This is done in InDesign, which is a great layout program, and I use it in the most rudimentary ways, but it serves my purposes. So I'm just sort of figuring out exactly how much I can fit in each panel. I print this out, and then start doing sketches on it. And here I'm just doing these, like, 8.5 by 11 pages, black and white, just Sharpies. Any old magic marker will do. And then I refine the drawing. I start playing with the compositions, play with them a little more. And then because I'm basing this so specifically on an old style comic, I'm also making these books out of clippings from the old comics. So I've photocopied all my old Jack Davis comics